to give you my 5 top reasons that I quit teaching. Let's start with number 5. Developmentally inappropriate standards and expectation placed upon young children. And let's take reading for example. Back even in the 90s, kids were not taught to read until 1st grade. Kindergarten was like half a day, and even going back further to my grandmother's generation, kids didn't even start school until 1st grade and had absolutely no clue. My grandmother had no clue what the letters were until she was looking up at these things on the blackboard. And now kids, by the end of kindergarten, are expected to be able to read. And so many kids are not ready to read yet. And yet, if they're not reading, they're labeled as being behind, and all these interventions need to be put in place to get them caught up. And kind of what happens is a lot of times they just kind of stay behind, but it's because they need to learn at their own pace. Let's look at comprehension isn't for something for older kids. So maybe a kid can read, but their comprehension's not developed yet. And yet kids are expected to be able to sequence, do cause and effect, problem and solution, all these like skills, critical thinking skills. And a big one I saw was with like inferencing. So all the kids, like all grades, had to do some form of inferencing, and yet consistently kids, disability or no disability, scored really low in inferencing when they had to like take a test. And this was even like statewide. And it'd be the same kids even year after year. Inferencing was low. Well, you would think that the state would go, all these kids are scoring low. Well, it's not because teachers aren't trying to teach it. It's just what you realize is that developmentally kids are not able to infer at such that level that is expected of them. They're just developmentally, they're not ready for it. And inferring can be a bit subjective for some people, and yet you're trying to standardize it. So what I might infer reading something you may not infer, and especially when it comes to poetry. I sucked at that in school doing poetry because I could never interpret things the right way, but whatever. And in math, so much math is expected of kids that they are not getting enough time to master and really learn and comprehend and understand the math skill, because the teacher has 1 week to teach these things and then moving on because she's got to teach this next. So you just have to come in for tutoring or hoping that the teacher has time to fit you in for intervention. Well, she has to do intervention anyway because your scores were low. And even like I think of looking at how the TEKS changed during my 3rd year teaching. The kids went from in 7th grade having to understand acute isosceles obtuse angle, which was pretty much the same when I was in school, moved from a 7th grade all the way down to 3rd grade. And there was a lot of other things like that just they just changed it. They took it from a older grade and they moved it down to a younger grade, which is kind of crazy that you would do that. And I don't even really know what the reasoning was, other than it's just like this whole thought that if we put more into kids and we teach them these things at a younger age, that they'll just get it. And that doesn't happen. Not the way our system is set up. Reason number 4. The way the education system treats students with disabilities. And if you've seen me in my previous videos, you would know that I was a special ed teacher doing resource and inclusion. So most of my kids had learning disabilities that really interfered with their learning, but they were very capable of functioning in the classroom, most of them. And kids are supposed to, in special education, supposed to have an individualized education program, which means we are giving them what the state law says, or the federal law, IDEA, says that we're to giving them an individualized education. That does not happen. We will write a plan and a program in place, but because of things like No Child Left Behind, a kid in special ed that in 5th grade, that despite their learning disability puts them at a 2nd grade reading level, they still have to learn and master the same fifth grade skill that all their other peers say. It is totally contradictory, and it's kind of just hypocritical. Like, what's the point of an IEP half the time when the kids have to learn the same thing as everyone else? And we write a goal for a kid that they will be able to do this, and like almost they can't realistically master all their goals because some of the prerequisite skills that they need, you spend so time working on those. It just really varies. And a lot of times we make them feel really dumb when they're just not ready to do certain things. And sometimes their disability can be so bad that they're not capable. Their brain is not capable of them processing and understanding certain pieces of information. They can't help it. Yet we put the same worksheet, the same test in front of them, and they're doing the same thing as their peers, but they get accommodations. So let's talk about these accommodations are having the questions and answers written. They have to read the same story as their peers, their non-disabled peers, that they're not really all capable of reading. They have to answer the same exact questions, but the only difference is, okay, the questions and answers get read aloud to them, and they get some extra time on the test. That's pretty much it. So they continuously fail over and over again, and they feel just stupid. And I was so tired of these kids feeling stupid that I'm having to teach them a lot of things that really weren't going to be irrelevant for them in the long run, because these kids were not all going to go to college, and that's okay. I don't think every kid needs to go to college. We need to be setting them up to be successful in life, and that could mean going a more career path, but yet I got to teach them to know the difference between an isosceles and scalene triangle. I never even had to use that again until I went back to teaching, because I sure couldn't remember the difference between them. And kind of when you look at a lot of times your more severe kids, that schools just don't have the ability to provide the best education for them possible that maybe they could get at home or in a private school maybe. You hear on the news all the time about a kid having a fit and a tantrum in the classroom, and sometimes we want to place that blame on the public school, and it's not totally fully. They have a disability, they can't cope with it. There's sometimes a lack of parenting discipline or training involved sometimes. And we blame these schools for doing things to kids that maybe they were just ignorant. They didn't know. Teachers aren't really trained very well to handle kids in special education. Now, I do feel like in my classroom, I did have a lot of autonomy because I was doing resource, and it was my job to get kids to master their goals. So I had to spend time working on those. Now, I was also expected to teach on the same standards that when I pulled them that 30 minutes out of their classroom, they were missing information that they're still going to be expected to know, but I got to fill in the gaps that they're missing. So it was just really just sucked the way that they were kind of treated. I mean, I think my team, we loved our kids very much, and we wanted what was best for them. But we were very confined by laws, rules, and regulations put in place. Reason number 3, lack of choices and freedom, laws, regulations all put in place. And as I just made a comment a moment ago about kids with disabilities and their rules in place on them, that kind of took away a lot of the autonomy that the teacher also has in the classroom to determine what was the best way to teach her kids. I do believe that a lot of teachers know their kids best, and they want what's best for their kids. So they want to, and sometimes they know, I really need to teach them this way, but then I also have to teach them these 20 other ways so they can pass a stupid test. And I think the fun part that can be of teaching has gone away. There's no extra time to do fun, like, okay, doing sometimes watercolors and tissue paper crafts maybe really not be beneficial to an education, but it kind of made things fun in school. Like we did in 4th grade when you learn all about Texas and we did the Alamo. We took a bar of Irish soap and we carved an Alamo. That really didn't have a whole lot of educational value, but it really made learning fun, and it kind of just put it in your head like, the Alamo and the shape of it, and it was just a fun thing to do. Okay, teachers don't have the freedom to do that fun stuff because they have to cram in so much information. And depending on what district you're in, a lot of districts, especially bigger ones, are very strict that you have to teach this particular thing this particular way and use this particular book and use this particular worksheet. So it's just, here you go, do this. Even though you may not want to do it, or it's crappy, or it's terrible for your kids, and so on. And all the fun little things that you would like plan lessons for, like when you're in college to be a teacher, like don't keep any of that stuff because you're not ever going to get to use it. You're going to have to do what you're told to do. Reason number 2 that I quit teaching. And if you haven't already picked up on this, it's the standardized testing and all the numbers and data that goes along with the testing. So every teacher will tell you that they are guilty of teaching to the test. And if they tell you they don't teach it to the test, well, they just don't know that's what they're doing, or they're just straight up lying to you. Because we all did it, because we had to. So much time was spent around testing, and all the worksheets kids do are based on standardized style questions. And then there's all like the wasted time preparing for tests and like all the benchmarks and practice tests you have to do multiple times throughout the year. So you're going to have 2 or 3 days of practice tests where you like simulate a real standardized testing day, and instead of teaching kids something, they're wasting all this time taking a test, all the prep that went involved with it. Teachers would always do these boot camps right before, the week before a test, so they would cram in all this stuff. Of course, they would try to make it fun. And they would just cram in all this information last minute in hopes that maybe something would stick with the kids so that they could do well on the test. And then all year long, the kids are taking different standardized type tests that may be created by the district with usually terrible questions in them. And then the teachers are sitting there poring over this data, the administrators are poring over this data, and then you're having to come up with interventions in place because this group of kids scored really low in this. So you need to spend your instructional time doing an intervention. Interventions in themselves aren't bad because you know kids sometimes are really weak in skills, but a test doesn't really tell you the truth behind what a kid does and doesn't know, and every teacher knows this. And every parent knows it, yet we just keep continuing this cycle of complaining about the testing and then just telling our kids they gotta suck it up and take this test, even though it doesn't mean anything in the long run. And what we had was a PLC room, so professional learning community, and all along the walls were like just data walls where we just sit there and examined all this data. And you had even like a reading thing with all like the kids' names and where their little card goes on their reading. They're this color on this level, and then you would move them as the year went on. And I was part of the campus improvement committee, and that was very eye-opening, and I wanted to do things and contribute as a special ed person because I felt like we were such a quiet, we were forgotten about being in special ed. But so much was focused on the stupid test and what all these little things we were going to do to make these scores bigger. It was about the data, about the numbers. The state only cares about those numbers and the data. They don't care about the uniqueness and personal background about each child. And it sucked. I got so tired of this stupid test, and I unintentionally put pressure on my kids about testing that I didn't think about, and it was convicting later on when it was brought to my attention. I'm going to confess something that I totally regret doing, and I didn't think about the time, but I had some really just flat out lazy kids that just wouldn't even try. They might have been capable, but they just wouldn't try. And it was very, very frustrating that I'm like, okay, I don't care if you pass it, but I would really like it if you could just kind of try. And I totally said something to a kid one time without really thinking about sorry to admit this. I made a comment about, if you don't even try on this test, they're going to think that me and Miss So-and-so are really bad teachers because you didn't even try. Yes, I said this and I'm very ashamed of it, and I didn't think about it. This was kind of in those early first or second year teaching. And I'm very sorry that I said something like that, because I think I ended up freaking a particular child out, and I put more stress on him that I shouldn't have. But I think I was just so frustrated, and like I said, I was still in the early stages of, I wasn't woke yet, okay? Okay, the number one reason I quit teaching is because I couldn't do this to my own children. I hated all the things that I was involved with and required to do with children, and I didn't want to do that to my own children. I didn't want them to have to waste so much time learning how to take a test and passing a test starting in kindergarten. It was crazy. We were having our kindergartners take standardized type tests. That was insane, okay? I wanted my kids to enjoy learning to read at their own pace. I look at my daughter now, and at first I thought, oh, okay, when I first started idea of homeschooling, I'm going to teach her to read when she's 4 years old. She's going to be so smart. And then I would start reading and studying things. I'm like, oh, well, I really need to slow back. Let's push it back to kindergarten. And even now, we're just taking it so slow. I'm trying not to put pressure on her and just being like, let's kind of enjoy, and just starting to just put a few, 3 letters together and sound out the word him, and then try to read it in a sentence and a story, and only spend 15 minutes a day doing that, and that's it. And when I realized, like, okay, she's not quite ready to move on, we're not going to move on. We're just going to practice it some more, or we're going to go work on this other skill and come back to it. I want to take things slow with her intentionally. She's only 5.5. It's okay. Even with math, I feel like she doesn't really need to know how to add and subtract just yet, so we're just going to keep practicing some of the basic stuff and try to go in and start, learning a little, but not expect her to be able to solve a problem. The freedom and the choice that I can have with my children, I can choose, and she can even choose at some point when she gets older, what she wants to learn. I get to decide what my child needs to learn, what I want her to learn. I want her to not just be schooled. I want her to have an education, and to be a well-rounded one with so much stuff that maybe by the time she hits 12 or 13 years old, she has an idea of what she wants to learn and can pursue what she wants, because I have laid a foundation for her that she otherwise would not get in school. I don't have to worry about the developmentally inappropriate stuff for her. She learns at her own pace. And if she's ready to advance through something, she can just breeze through it instead of having to wait for her peers to catch up to her. Now, while none of my kids that I'm aware of have any kind of learning disability, I like knowing that if they do, they will be in such a safe environment that they won't feel dumb and stupid, because they will be learning at their own pace. So yes, those are my 5 reasons